Hello, welcome to the second chapter in business communication. Today we're going to be doing the first of two presentations. I'm going to talk about team communication in some detail. I like the chapter a lot in terms of how it discusses team communication, and I'll specifically encourage you to learn some lessons from the chapter in the Newman book. But there's some really cool work going on out there that the author did not have the time or space or inclination to cover that I think is fascinating and is useful and helpful, and really wanted to drill down on and emphasize. In the context of team communication, I want to talk about three things. First, what are the 5 keys to successful teams? This comes out of a really cool project that happened at Google. Google is a large enough company with enough resources. They really like to research themselves in a lot of detail. And we can learn from that. The 2 of the 5 that I really want to drill on, as you can see here, are psychological safety and dependability. First, the overview. This is as found in an article by Charles Duhigg. It's called What Google Learned from Its Quest to Build the Perfect Team. New research reveals surprising truths about why some work groups thrive and others falter. This article appeared in the New York Times Magazine. The link to that article appears in the lecture notes here. Again, this was some research that was done at Google. Google titled this research Project Aristotle, and the reason they did so, as hinted at by this actual picture of Aristotle, who is the person on the right, that's Plato on the left here, is that Aristotle is the one who coined the phrase, "The whole is greater than the sum of its parts." Ideally, when you are at work working on a team, the work that you produce as a team is greater than the sum of what that each individual team member could produce individually. That is the norm and the expectation at work today, and it really should be. If you've got really a project of any substantial size to do, it's something that no individual is going to be able to do by themselves, and that you simply can't just divide and hand into a bunch of individuals either. You will need to find a way to work together in teams, and ideally, as Aristotle notes, the whole will be greater than the sum of its parts. But the key is to build some successful teams using what Google found to be 5 essential elements of successful teams. The first of those is dependability. You need to be able to depend on your teammates, and your teammates need to be able to depend on you. If you say you're going to do something, you have to do it, and your teammates have to do the same. Or else we start to lose dependability, and that's one of the easiest ways to have a team breakdown. For those of you who have seen professional sports teams turn on each other, the lack of dependability of one or more of the players is often the core cause of that. Now, there's sometimes you catch the ball, sometimes you drop it, sometimes you throw it to the person on your team, sometimes you throw it to the person on the other team. And I think a certain level of that's just how much skill I actually have, and I'm bringing everything I have to the team. That teammates will forgive up to a really pretty high level, but if one stops showing up or stops putting in one's best effort, or even there's the perception that one is not dependable to the best of one's ability, that is a pretty easy way to lose teammates in sports or at the workplace. The next is a structure and clarity. We got to know who's doing what on the team, and we got to be clear about it, and everyone has to know it. The third element is that one has to believe the statement that my work has meaning. If all you're doing is producing something that 2 weeks later is torn up, or is put in a file drawer, or is not used, and then you start another project that in 3 weeks is also not used, or isn't considered a contribution, then it's going to be really easy to lose faith in the work that you're doing. And so you always have to make sure that the work has meaning for everyone on the team. Fourth, you have to believe that your contributions have an impact. my contributions have to be something that matter to the team, and that has to be true of the other people on the team. And if everyone on the team believes that, that their work on the team has meaning and that their contributions have an impact, then you're well on your way to building a successful team. Fifth and last but not least is psychological safety. Now, this is one of the two I'm going to drill down on, so I'll just get to it. When we talk about building psychological safety, this image is a pretty good metaphor. The person in red is a tightrope walker, and that's a pretty dangerous occupation, right? I mean, people have died on walking a tightrope over high heights a number of times. It's literally a very deadly occupation. And the giant hand underneath it is the metaphor of a personal net that we don't, instead of a physical net that an actual tightrope walker would have to increase their safety. The idea is that other people at work are providing in their personal form the metaphorical net to make sure that one has a safe place to fall. The idea of including this picture in the article, and as I've included in this presentation, is that one will fall, right? Every worker will make mistakes, will have problems, will have shortcomings, will produce what they think is a good product and it won't be a good enough product, will produce what they think is the right product and it'll wind up being the wrong product based on the specifications that were given. And so we need ways to make sure that when those failures do happen, that there is a net underneath them, because going to work with no net is going to create tremendous psychological anxiety. The Google Rework blog has a great quote here about this. Psychological safety refers to an individual's perception of the consequences of taking an interpersonal risk or a belief that a team is safe for risk-taking in the face of being seen as ignorant, incompetent, negative, or disruptive. In a team with high psychological safety, teammates feel safe to take risks around their team members. They feel confident that no one on the team will embarrass or punish anyone else for admitting a mistake, asking a question, or offering a new idea. So if you want to increase psychological safety, then never treat anyone who has made an honest mistake as ignorant or incompetent. Never respond to them in a way that is unduly negative or harshly critical. Honest and fair feedback is an important part of good teamwork, and the book, as I'll mention later, again, does a great job of talking about how to give good feedback. But it's important to keep all feedback within the context of we're providing a safety net here. We're trying to make sure that everyone gets across this chasm safely. There's a great study by Amy Edmondson called Psychological Safety and Learning Behavior in Work Teams. And if you can't read that image, the text on that image very well, it says Administrative Science Quarterly. It's just a cover of the journal that the study comes from. The study by Edmondson in it she creates a great set of questions to ask at the workplace as a way to measure psychological safety. And I've just included all 7 of those questions in the notes of this slide so that you can see them. And keep in mind that these questions could cut in both directions. Sometimes the answer to the question, a high number or a high agreement with that question, means that there is a lot of psychological safety. And sometimes high agreement with that question means that there's very little psychological safety at that workplace. So that's just ordinary good survey design, where you don't want everyone to be able to mark all 7s or all 1s. You want people to actually have to think about the question that you're asking. And so she switches those questions so they cut in both directions. And for the first 2 to highlight that, I've indicated which is which, but it's pretty clear as you go through the questions. Number 1, if you make a mistake on this team, it is often held against you. Obviously, the more you agree with that statement, a higher score on agreeing with that statement means that your workplace is less safe. Number 2, members of this team are able to bring up problems and tough issues. Now, if that's true, then obviously psychological safety is high. Number three, people on this team sometimes reject others for being different. Ooh, that's a great way to have a psychologically unsafe workplace. Number four, it is safe to take a risk on this team. We do want that, obviously. Number five, it is difficult to ask other members of this team for help. That's a bad thing. Number six, no one on this team would deliberately act in a way that undermines my efforts. That's a good indicator of psychological safety. If you're confident that no one's gonna undermine your efforts. And seven, working with members of this team, my unique skills and talents are valued and utilized, which comes back to everyone is valued, everyone's contributes feel meaningful. So as you're hearing, some of these ideas of how to build a psychologically safe team do have some overlap as well. Duhigg in the book Smarter, Faster, Better, the transformative power of real productivity, has a great list of specific strategies for creating psychological safety. They include, don't interrupt teammates during conversations, demonstrate your listening by summarizing what you just heard, admit what you don't know, everyone speaks at every meeting, encourage people who are upset to express their frustrations, encourage teammates to respond in non-judgmental ways, and call out group conflicts and resolve through open discussion. That's a really hard one, but the book, in terms of feedback and discussion of team dynamics, is also backs up that play. So I think that's a hard one to do, to call out group conflicts and to resolve through open discussion. But it's a really important one when you've got some real conflict going on in the team. And so I like this graphic a great deal. It comes right out of the Duhigg book. It shows five folks sitting around a conference table. They're all speaking. Every one of them has a word bubble coming out, and all of those word bubbles are within a cloud that says psychological safety. And that's an important visualization of that concept that everyone speaks at every meeting. We want a place where not only everyone feels safe to speak at every meeting, but everyone is speaking at every meeting, because that is going to create the norm that when you've got something to say, you say it. The arrow pointing at the thought bubbles reads equal voices. That obviously in its purest form, where among five people, each person speaks for exactly 20% of the time and has exactly 20% of the influence on the decisions that are made, is a little bit unrealistic, but that is certainly what one is shooting for. And the arrow pointing at the cloud of psychological safety says social sensitivity. Sometimes social sensitivity simply means understanding different personalities, understanding what kind of day or week or month or year people are having, right? If somebody just lost a pet, or it is overtaxed based on some other committee or project that they're working on at work. These are important things to understand. But sometimes social sensitivity means doing your best to understand people who are from a different background, from a different cultural understanding, from a different part of the country, of a different generation, have different educational backgrounds, whatever those different variables are that contribute to diversity in the workplace. That's also an important part of how we build social sensitivity, is understanding those and bringing that understanding to the workplace every day. Now, I will talk in a lot more depth about that social sensitivity in the context of diversity and inclusion in the next presentation that I'm giving on Chapter 2. So that's psychological safety. How do we build dependability in team communication? This also is really important. And here it's, there's the really, really short cliche answer, which is, well, everyone just does their job. And that's great. Obviously, everyone showing up with an attitude to try to do the job to the best of their ability is an important part of a psychologically healthy workplace. But we also need to build systems in place so that we're not depending on everyone showing up just being really highly dedicated people who automatically will self-correct and figure out 100% of the time what it is that they should be doing, because that's pretty unrealistic. Most people don't bring 100% effort 100% of the time to the workplace. And even so, most people are not going to figure out what they're doing on their own without some feedback and some guidance from teammates. So I want to bring up a great example of how to make dependability the norm in the workplace, which is really constructive feedback given on a regular basis. And to do that, I want to highlight this business called The Other Side Movers. Now, as you can see, they serve the Salt Lake City area and the surrounding area. And when I took this screenshot, which admittedly is a bit ago, but it still really sings for me. And they have 97 reviews and still have a 5-star rating. Now, not every mover is terrible, but to have that many people that satisfied with a moving company is just incredible. I mean, it's hard to believe that is even a possible thing. Look up other movers in Denver and Salt Lake, anywhere, and it's just not the norm. We hardly have across really any sector. We have very, very few companies that have a 5-star rating. But it gets even more impressive than that. I found the story of The Other Side Movers in an article in the Harvard Business Review by Joseph Grenny. It's called How to Make Feedback Feel Normal. Again, I've got a citation to that in the lecture slide notes here. And what Grenny writes is, over the past year, I've watched a group of 50 criminals, hardcore drug addicts, and homeless people start 3 highly successful companies. The first was a moving company called The Other Side Movers. All 50 are part of a 2-year program called the Other Side Academy, or TOSA. The majority of the students at TOSA are there as an alternative to incarceration. Some were facing prison sentences decades in length. Instead, they are now living in a large historic home, running businesses as a way to learn a new way of living. So this company is not only has a 5-star rating, they have a 5-star rating with people who would fail a background check for the most part, with people who would not make it as employees at a standard moving company, and quite the contrary, that most moving companies would be terrified to hire, and yet they're outclassing the competition every day and every year. The reason that they've been successful is that they're a company that is based on teamwork, that is based on feedback, that's based on constructive, helpful, meaningful feedback given on a regular, consistent basis. Now, the author says, quote, the primary reason people struggle with giving and receiving feedback is not a lack of proficiency, but of frequency. So the more frequently we can give feedback to our teammates, the stronger our team is going to be. The phrase that the Other Side Movers uses is that you are to be 200% accountable. 200% accountable in your work. Now, that's 100% accountable for meeting the standards yourself, and also 100% accountable for every other person that you're working with at the time. So if you do your job and somebody next to you sloughs off, isn't putting in 100% effort, tries to cut a corner, then you're also responsible. You're every bit as responsible for them not meeting that standard as they are responsible. That's what they mean by 200% accountable. And there are 2 innovations in feedback here that actually are pretty good, even if some of the flavor of it may not work especially well in the context of your team. But if you have the opportunity to introduce these innovations to a team and make them normal, you will only strengthen the team that you're working on. The first is what they call pull-ups. Now, a pull-up is just a simple identification of something that needs correcting, and you identify it right away, and you just identify it very straightforwardly. Hey, you did X when really you're supposed to do Y. So as you know, our company policy is, here's a hypothetical example. As you know, we're supposed to wrap all furniture in blankets. I saw you loading that dresser and you didn't put a blanket around it. That dresser could get scratched, and then we've got somebody dissatisfied. Let's make sure we wrap it in blankets every time. Now, the trick is getting that norm of a pull-up into the team as an expectation for everyone, not just supervisors. It shouldn't take a supervisor seeing somebody failing to meet the standard to correct that. And so the idea of a pull-up is that we normalize that and naturalize that within the team, that every team member says that to another team member as soon as you see something like that in the real, in the actual moment where that's actually happening. The second, and this is a lot more fun, is what they call games. Twice a week, now again, I'm quoting from the article now. Twice a week, all employees sit in a circle and play the game. The game is a peer-driven process of bringing feedback to those you care enough about to help them improve. In the midst of the game, one team member turned to a colleague and yelled, "Rick," not his real name, why were you staring at that woman's body today? And then the author notes, I cleaned up the exact allegation. We can use our imagination. The author continues, Rick flushed red. Quote, "I was not," he shot back. "The hell you weren't. You were sitting there checking her out while her back was turned. It made me sick. You put us all at risk. We have a reputation and you could throw it all away by acting like a creep. Knock it off." Rick still looked defiant until 3 other team members spoke up. By the third, Rick's shoulders slumped. He said, "I'm sorry. Yeah, I do that. I'll stop." And the game moved to the next employee. So if you can ever get to a point where you have enough influence over a team to set up something like this, where once a week or once a month but ideally once a week, you get together and give each other critical but helpful and honest and fair and not personal, but the identified, tethered to the specific behavior, right? Notice that they don't. Yeah, where's this quote here? You could throw it all away by acting like a creep. That's an important distinction. And I'm gonna, in the next slide, I'm gonna recommend very strongly to you that, again, that you look at the book chapter on feedback. And I think this is really important. There's a really important distinction here between saying this behavior is acting like a creep and Rick, you're a creep. Right? You never want to say the latter, and you never want to let the latter happen in a workplace and just let it come and go if you have anything to say about it. Instead, what you want is to identify a specific behavior and say, this is the behavior of someone who is, this is the behavior. This behavior is not acceptable because XYZ. Right, so this specific behavior is the subject of the criticism, but Rick, we still value as an employee. That has to be the overall connotation. That has to be the overall context of that communication for it to really work. And that's what happens here. That's a really good idea. And so, if you really want good teams to have, if you really want your teams to be really dependable in their communication, feedback, and even critical feedback, is going to be a really important part of that. And the best way to do that is to normalize regular feedback, regular criticism. So that's what I have to say on team communication above and beyond what the Newman book has. The book is quite good. It's also especially good, as I keep saying, feedback. And I put an exclamation here on purpose. I think her description of how to give good feedback is one of the better descriptions I've seen. I can't recommend it strongly enough. She also is great on conflict resolution. Now, there are tons more that you could say on conflict resolution. For those of you who want to know a great deal more about conflict resolution, we actually have our own expert on that, Professor Michelle Clark over in the management department. Is a certified mediator and has done a lot of work as doing mediation. And so how do we resolve conflict is something that the book just starts to scratch the surface of. But if you really want to get in, if you're looking for recommendations on where to go to learn a whole lot more, Professor Clark, I'm sure, would be quite happy to chat with you. Finally, the book is really good on team writing. This is a hard topic to cover well in such a short space, and I think she does a really good job of it. So, in other words, the rest of the chapter on team communication is quite good, and I specifically recommend you look for making sure you get the most you can out of these particular topics, because I think it's an excellent piece. So with that, I'll wrap up this presentation. Tune in to the next one, which is about intercultural communication, multiculturalism, and dealing with and maximizing and leveraging and benefiting from diversity and inclusion.